Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be looking at a little product that promises big things. The NanoFoamer is a result of a recent, hugely successful Kickstarter campaign. It's basically a milk frother that claims to create cafe-quality microfoam in just 20 seconds. So is it any good? How does it compare to a steam wand? And has it dethroned the trusty French press as the budget way to texture milk? Let's find out. So straight off the bat, you can see that this product was created by someone who has a really good understanding of design, both form and function. So when you look at the functional design, the way this product works is so simple and elegant, you wonder why no one thought of it before. Basically, a high-speed motor spins a mini propeller and forces air and milk through a fine mesh, or a nanoscreen as they call it, to create bubbles so tiny you can't see them apart with your naked eye. Now, this comes with two meshes. One is the superfine and the other is the fine mesh. And a combination of the mesh and churn time will dictate how thick the head of foam is and how small the bubbles are. For example, the superfine mesh with a fairly quick churn time would be great for something like a flat white, sporting detailed latte art like a Rosetta or a Swan. You could even use it without a screen to mix drinks or create dry foam. So the handle doubles as the battery housing and is sealed off by a rubber O-ring, which makes the whole thing quite water resistant. And that's great for a product that's going to be spending most of its time around liquids. You also get a case that's great for storage or travel and protects the shaft. And lastly, you get a nifty wall mount and a brush that's useful for multiple things. Now, coming to aesthetics, this product stays true to the name of the company that makes it. It is clean, understated, and minimalist in design. And honestly, there's not much else to say other than we love how this thing looks. Now, while this product looks great, it definitely falls a bit short when it comes to build quality. The images and renders on the website and campaign suggest a more refined and robust product than the actual one. This just feels a little bit plasticky and cheap, and parts like this, which look like they're metal, are actually powder-coated plastic. But our biggest gripe, however, would have to be with these screens. They are particularly flimsy and actually warp when you've used them just a few times. In fact, the superfine screen that we received annoyingly kept popping off every now and then. Luckily, customer support is great and they sent us these replacement screens right away. Anyway, moving on to the most important part of this review, performance. Does this thing actually do what it says? So the short answer would be a big, fat yes, just maybe not in 20 seconds. Now, we've spent over 2 months using this product extensively, experimenting, tinkering, and tweaking so that you won't have to. But before we dive into our technique, we'd like to touch upon a few things that you can keep in mind to get the most out of this product. So first, let's address battery life. While the high-speed motor on this thing is amazing, it is super hungry. I mean, this thing will eat through a set of batteries before you can say cappuccino. We've actually seen a drop in performance after just making 7 or 8 drinks. So here's what we suggest. Get 4 good rechargeable batteries like the Aniloops, and that way you always have a spare set ready to go. It is super frustrating to start texturing only to realize the batteries are low, because you know your milk is going to be subpar, the double shot of espresso is going cold, and that temper that you're not proud of, you know, the one that only coffee can keep at bay, that starts to bubble up. So just trust us and get those spare set of batteries. Next up, the nano screens. Now, like we mentioned earlier, these are tiny and flimsy, so we're always scared that we'll either lose them or break them. Luckily, Subminimal sells replacement screens, and we highly recommend you get a pair or more. The other thing to be very cognizant of with the screens, especially the superfine, is clogging. Now, if you leave the milk on the wand for even a few minutes after texturing, there is significantly more buildup than if you rinse it right away. So we recommend that you rinse the screens right after texturing, even before you pour, because even a partially clogged screen will drastically drop the performance of this product. Another thing that you can do every couple of weeks is to soak the screen in vinegar and baking soda and leave it overnight and then scrub it clean the next morning. That way you can get rid of the inevitable buildup that happens around the sides, and you can ensure that your screens are always squeaky clean. Lastly, in our testing, we found that this product is more likely to under texture rather than the other way around. So when you're using it, we recommend you go a little longer than you think you need to avoid ending up with a skimpy head of foam, which will ruin your morning. Note that this has been our experience with the whole milk that we use every day, but your mileage may vary. Now, with these things out of the way, let's get to the fun part, our technique. While there is a bit of a learning curve, once you've got this technique down, you'll be able to texture milk that not only has great mouthfeel, but also lends itself to some very detailed and intricate latte art. I'm no latte artist, but I try. If you really want to see what this thing is capable of in the right hands, check out this account on Instagram. Okay, so start by holding the NanoFoamer so that the shaft is at 90 degrees to the surface of the milk. We like this grip, but you can use whatever is comfortable for you as long as you're able to maintain this angle. Next, insert the wand about an inch and start the churn dead center. You'll know you're centered if you can see the propeller fully within the vortex cavity and there's milk swirling around it. Hold this for 10 seconds and then slowly start moving outwards towards the edge of the pitcher. Now, make sure you're maintaining this angle and the submerged depth. And the moment you're slightly off center, you should start seeing milk wrap around the shaft. And as you go further and further away from the center, more and more milk will wrap around and larger bubbles will start to form. Now, at some point in this journey, the milk will completely engulf the propeller and you will no longer be able to see it. At this point, stop and hold. We have essentially now completed what is called the stretch or the aeration of the milk. This next step, it's very important to continue to maintain this angle and the submerged depth and make sure that the propeller is submerged at all times. If it exits the surface of the milk and starts spluttering, creating more bubbles, make sure you adjust the height a little bit so that it always remains just below the surface of the milk. When you're holding, you'll start to see the larger bubbles disappear as they get incorporated into microfoam, and you continue to hold until all of the bubbles disappear and the surface of the milk looks like glossy paint. Another interesting and very useful cue to use is sound. From the center to the hold position and until you complete texturing, things will progressively get quieter and quieter, and you'll ultimately be left with the faint groan of the motor with silky smooth milk flowing around. So that's it. You have beautifully textured cafe quality milk with a simple technique that's very repeatable. Moving on to a couple of caveats. While the core principles of maintaining the angle and submerged depth and moving from the center outwards will remain consistent across milk and alt milks, there are a couple of parameters which will vary depending on what you're texturing and how much of it. First, timing will vary. Now, oat milk is thicker than whole milk, is thicker than skim milk, and so on. And they all have very different chemical compositions and fat and protein structures, so they will froth very differently. Next, be aware that the submerged depth and the churn time both affect the quantity and quality of the texture. What that means is if you submerge a little deeper, then you're going to hit that hold point a little quicker because the propeller is going to get engulfed a little faster. And the opposite is true if you hold it at a shallower depth. So just pay attention to that and change these variables based on what you're texturing, the kind of texture that you want, and the quantity that you're working with. So to wrap this one up, let's answer a couple of questions that I know are on a lot of your minds. Firstly, who is this for? And secondly, how does it stack up against the competition? We'd say the NanoFoamer is for anyone who has an espresso machine that doesn't have steaming capabilities and or wants portability. As for the competition, we'll only look at devices that are capable of doing what the NanoFoamer does, which is texture cafe quality milk that is also capable of latte art. One, you have an espresso machine with a steam wand. Next, you have stovetop steamers like the Bellman. And lastly, we have the French press. Now, an espresso machine with a good steam wand that produces high quality dry steam will get you slightly better results and much quicker because it is steaming and heating at the same time, albeit at a much higher cost. Next, let's look at a stovetop steamer like the Bellman. Now, this is also a lot more expensive than the NanoFoamer, and if you've ever used a commercial steam wand, you know that this leaves a lot to be desired. It's a bit fiddly, takes a lot longer to produce good texture, and is also, quite frankly, a bit scary. So our preference here would still be the NanoFoamer. Lastly, and the one that we were most curious about, does it dethrone the trusty French press as the budget way to texture milk? Now, while we've been huge advocates of the French press technique and will still highly recommend it, the NanoFoamer does edge it out for a few reasons. Firstly, the precise control and repeatability. The French press has always been a little bit of a hit or miss. Next, the workflow is more streamlined and cleanup is definitely easier, as long as you make sure to rinse that screen right after texturing. Lastly, and most importantly, the quality of the microfoam that the NanoFoamer produces is a step better than the French press and allows you to pour a lot easier and more detailed latte art. For us, the French press has always created slightly stickier foam, which makes it harder to pour anything intricate. So before we go, we know this is a NanoFoamer review, but we did want to talk about the flow tip pitcher for a second. This thing looks beautiful and is built really well. Now, the straight spot design is something that takes a little bit getting used to, but is capable of very intricate pours. The open handle is amazing for someone like me who has humongous hands. And the fact that you can throw it on a stove or an induction hob and heat milk directly in it is very nifty. So as you have seen, this is a very capable tool that will be a great addition to your coffee arsenal. We know we complained about the build quality, but given the price, it isn't terrible. That being said, we would absolutely love to see another model with more metal parts and better plastic, and would be more than happy to pay a little bit more for it. That's it. We hope you found this useful. And now we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Do you have a NanoFoamer? Do you like it? And is your technique anything like ours? Until next time, brew aaram se.